Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at the French and Indian War, which was an important conflict between the French and the British that took place on the North American continent. And it's important for us because it sets the stage for the beginning of the American Revolution, which we'll be spending a lot of time on in the next couple of weeks. So let's get started. The first thing that we have to understand to make sense of the French and Indian War is that the French had been setting up colonies in the New World in the same way that the British had been. So while the British were establishing colonies on the east coast of North America, the French had been branching out and setting up trading networks and cities on the interior of the continent. The first people who started claiming territory for France were fur traders. And they set up the trading post of Quebec in 1608, which was just 1 year after Jamestown was founded. And Quebec would eventually grow to become the most important city in New France. From 1608 onward, the French went on to claim vast territories as they spread out searching for skins, which they could sell back to Europe to make a profit. But even though they claimed vast territory, they remained few in number. One thing they did, though, to make up for their small numbers was they made alliances with Native Americans. And rather than killing them or kicking them out like the British did, the French treated them in a friendly manner and turned them into important trading partners and also into military allies. Over time, the French did establish a bigger presence in the New World, and they set up important settlements in Detroit, Illinois, and they also founded the very important city of New Orleans, which became an important port for them. In spite of this, their population remained small, and even by the end of the colonial period, there were only 60,000 French colonists on the whole continent, whereas there were something like 2.5 million colonists in the British colonies. So even though it's territorially huge, in terms of numbers, it's pretty small. So France and England are competing superpowers in the world during this time period. From 1700 to basically 1800, the French and the British are locked in constant war, trying to prove who is the stronger of the two powers. And these wars are carried out not only in Europe, but all across the world, in all of the different colonies that the French and British set up. And one of the places where these conflicts happen is in North America. So from 1688 to 1748, there are a number of small clashes between the French and the British. And, you know, one person wins one war, one person wins the other, but really there's no clear winner in these smaller conflicts. And so what this means is that there's a building up of tension, and both sides are getting ready for a larger conflict. The thing that kicks off the French and Indian War is competition for the territory known as Ohio, right on the border between New France and the English colonies. So both the French and the English claim Ohio, but the French start to construct a system of forts to secure the territory from any sort of British encroachment. But the British, of course, don't like this, and they respond by sending a military expedition to attack the French forts in the Ohio area. So conflicts between the French and the English are growing for a long time, but the thing that kicks off this really big conflict is this guy named George Washington. And yes, this is the George Washington. He is at this point just a young military commander, and he leads a force of like 150 guys from Virginia up into Ohio to contest the area and try and claim it for America rather than for France. And this leads to some conflict. George Washington is defeated after a couple of battles, and he is sent home back to Virginia with his tail between his legs. And this minor conflict, which George Washington initiated, kicks off a world war where countries from all over the world are drawn into this conflict between the French and the British. And this war is fought all over the place, but one of its most important theaters is in North America between the French and the British colonial areas. Both Britain and France send reinforcements to America. They send professional armies there. And both sides also enlist Indian allies. the French enlist an Indian tribe or people known as the Huron, and the British ally with the Iroquois. And they will actually send these Indian tribes against one another, hoping to weaken them and whatnot. So the British go on the offensive at the beginning of the war, and they're led by this guy named General Braddock. And he leads an army into the wilderness between the French and the British areas to attack one of the most important French forts, known as Fort Duquesne, not Duquesne. But he does not have very much success. The traditional style of fighting in Europe is very orderly and involves standing in straight lines and marching forward and stuff like that. All things that are very difficult to do in the thick forests of the Ohio region. And so what this means is that the French fur traders and the Native American allies of the French are able to inflict huge amounts of damage on the British army. And so these sneak attacks eventually force the British army to retreat, and they kill General Braddock. So it's basically a total loss on the side of the British. The British try a couple more attacks like this, where they lead big armies into the woods, and they fail in a similar way. So the British start out pretty badly. Things turn around for the British, however, when a new prime minister named William Pitt takes charge of British strategy. And he decides that instead of focusing all of their effort on these wilderness campaigns, he is going to have small forces of Indians and colonists to hold the wilderness frontier. And he's going to focus all of the might of the British Army and Navy on the major cities in French Canada, that is Quebec and Montreal. And the idea is that by capturing these major cities, they can cut off the rest of New France from contact with the sea, and therefore with real France, and slowly choke out the French forts. And this works. They can fight normal battles up in Canada, not like these behind-the-tree fights that you see going on down in Ohio. And after an important battle known as the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, the British conquer Quebec. And with the conquest of Quebec, the French are forced to surrender in 1763. And this leads to British victory and British dominance in North America. We'll talk more about the after effects of the war in a couple days. Here are some key terms. What I'd like for you to take out of this video is just the general course of the war. We'll talk about the important effects of the war on Thursday and Friday, probably.